So let's take a look at our automation menus. There's a couple different ways we can get into the automation menus. One is going to be with our shortcut button from the default Run 1. We can get back to our run screens with the shortcut button here. We can also get into those menus by hitting the back and select an automation. So when we come in here, we're going to start off on the basic tab. We can choose our crop type on there, and we can choose our strategy. So we got performance, max throughput, and fixed throughput, just like we talked about with the feed rate machine. We also have best grain quality. Now, typically with an automation machine, typically running in performance. Performance works really good in corn and beans if you're in flat to gently rolling terrain. It's going to push that machine pretty hard. It's going to adjust the machine based off of losses as well as off the sample in the grain tank. The other one I might use if I get in really rolling ground with automation would be my fixed throughput. So really hilly ground, using fixed throughput keeps me running at a pretty good bushels per hour with the machine. It's not as likely if I'm going down a really steep hill to overrun the machine where automation is trying to make a lot of corrections when I get to the bottom of the hill. Now with best grain quality, that's going to be, say I'm doing food grade corn, I'm doing soybeans, seed beans, best grain quality is a good option. Best grain quality puts a little bit more emphasis on the damaged grain and the material other than grain that are going past the grain camera. So it's going to sacrifice a little bit of performance in some cases to give me a better sample in the tank. Then just like our feed rate, we can choose our max ground speed. Like we said on the feed rate section, typically going to set that about 1 mile an hour faster than my normal harvesting speed to give me a little bit of capacity gain when I get in lower yielding sections of the field. Target maximum engine load, typically around 100 to 105% is what we'll run with that. We come over to our advanced tab. So when we come into the advanced tab, we've got a couple options for initial settings. We can use current setup or we can use automatic. So if you basically want to go out to the field with the machine, turn the automation switch on and go from there, you're going to set this to automatic. If you want to go out with the machine, get it dialed in pretty close first like you have in the past. Get those sensitivities on your loss columns adjusted so those columns are running around 50%, and then turn automation on and start working with it. Then you want to use current setup, and that's going to start off of your settings and it will adjust from there. Then we've got our adjust frequency. So we've got 3 adjust frequencies, a low, medium, and a high. So low is going to evaluate the machine performance every 40 seconds. It's going to use 20 seconds worth of data averaged together to make adjustments. Medium is going to look at the machine performance every 20 seconds, and it's going to use 10 seconds of data averaged together to make adjustments. High is going to look at the performance every 20 seconds. It's going to use a little bit tighter band of data to make those adjustments. It's looking more at the peaks and the valleys to make those adjustments. And then we've got our threshing condition. So threshing condition, typically we start with easy. So threshing condition is going to play in to our minimum rotor speed that the system is going to run, as well as our vane position that the system is going to run. So if I go from easy to medium, let's say I'm in corn, in easy it's going to give the vanes a pretty wide range of adjustment, and it's going to allow that rotor speed to run from around 300 RPMs to 450 RPMs. When I go from easy to medium, it's going to bring that minimum rotor speed up from 300 RPMs to 350 RPMs, and it's going to restrict my vanes down to very slow to maybe around medium. When I go to hard, it's going to bring that rotor speed up again, so my rotor speed will be at 400 to 450 RPM, and my vanes are going to stay basically at that very slow position when I go to the hard setting. Now typically we recommend starting in easy. Easy is going to give you more range of adjustment with the vanes and the rotor speed. But if we're doing a crop that's hard to thresh, we can start to bring these up. Now the thing to keep in mind with this is we're only adjusting vane position and rotor RPM. So if we're in a hard thresh crop, we maybe don't have the right concaves in, we maybe don't have the concave clearance set correctly. We want to take a look at those items as well in addition to making these adjustments here. Now if we're doing a crop like high moisture corn, I typically recommend with high moisture where we need a little bit more RPM, we want to keep that RPM more up towards that 400 RPM range, that we look at running with the hard setting. That's going to bring that RPM up a little higher. It's going to restrict those vanes a little bit more to help get that corn separated out from that wet crop material. We also have a headland tab in the automation menu. So a little bit of a glitch with this here in that it is displaying those sieve openings in inches, and everything we are familiar with for about the last 10 years with Case IH machines is sieve settings in millimeters. So to simplify this for myself so that I understand what it's saying in here, I go into my toolbox, I go to my operator, I change those units to metric, I come back into my automation tab. So now I can see those sieve offsets in millimeters. Now typically the way I adjust my headland, so what headland does for us is we can adjust the fan, the upper sieve, the lower sieve, and the pre-sieve when we raise that head to turn in the headland. And the way I typically do it is I will adjust it so that I am dropping that fan RPM down about 150 to 250 RPM. That's going to slow that fan as the machine is unloading, help minimize the chances of blowing crop out the back of the machine on the headland. And then I will typically open the upper sieve around 2 to 4 millimeters. So that kind of works the same way as slowing the fan down. We open the upper sieve up a little bit. It helps drop some of that crop through the upper sieve and minimize the chance of blowing crop out the back as the machine unloads. The lower sieve, what I typically do with the lower sieve is I will close that lower sieve down on the headland. And I'll typically start off with about a 4 millimeter setting on there. Particularly if you're doing soybeans, what I've seen a lot of times, you can get your machine set where you've got a really pretty sample, and then if you look after you turn on the headland, that's when you're seeing those pods come in the tank. So I will adjust that lower sieve while I'm turning on the headland until I keep those pods out of the tank. So I think sometimes I've gone as high as 8 millimeters, 6 millimeters for different crops to keep that those pods out of the tank or keep the bits of cob out of the tank as we're turning on the end. Now the pre-sieve, I typically leave that at 0. Don't see a lot of need to adjust that one for the headland. So once I've made all those adjustments, I can go back into my toolbox operator, change those units back to USA so that everything else looks right, and come back into my automation tab. My next tab over is my status tab. So that shows me all of the items that automation is using to make that system work. So I can go through and see all those items. I've got a green checkbox on all of those items. And then my next tab is my range configuration. So range configuration is going to default to off. If we see there's certain items in the system that maybe aren't working exactly the way we feel that they should for our crop conditions, we can come into range configuration and we can make some adjustments to some of them. Now when we turn range configuration on, we can select our crop type, we can select our threshing condition, our strategy, and we can turn that range configuration back off in here if we want. Now I typically recommend with this, this is a little bit of a new development for the software. If we're running on our advanced tab on an easy thresh condition and I want to adjust ranges, I'm going to set my threshing condition here. I'm going to come into ranges. I'm going to set my threshing condition there. I'm going to set my strategy to what I'm running, and I'm going to adjust that range in here. If I change threshing condition as I'm harvesting, I'm going to come back in here, change my threshing condition in here, and change that range that I want to change. So for example, one that we have changed a lot of times in wheat, We've seen it in a lot of the wheat that we do across the wheat belt in North America, that the automation pre-sieve ranges are a little too wide. So we will come in here a lot of times and we will restrict the movement of that pre-sieve. So in wheat, for example, I think it can go up to 8 or 10 millimeters. We'll set the maximum at around 6 and the minimum around 2, and then it's got to work within that range there. Now, one thing with ranges that I have tried that has not worked for me is I thought with the lower sieve, I could give it a range similar to what we run on a non-automation machine in corn. So I typically, in corn, open my bottom sieve wide open, especially if I'm doing high moisture corn. I want that bottom sieve wide open, get that grain down through there, minimizing my tailings, minimizing my damage. And we really don't have anything in corn that we need to rethresh. So we can let it go ahead and fall through that bottom sieve. And I have tried setting that minimum on the bottom sieve up close to that maximum setting so that that bottom sieve would basically stay open. The issue you run into with that is automation wants to keep the upper sieve wider than the lower sieve. So if I come in here and I tell it I want my minimum to be 24, it's going to keep my upper sieve running wider than 24. So that may have a negative effect on my sample. So what I recommend to guys, if we're doing high moisture corn, instead of using the ranges for the lower sieve, is we're going to set that lower sieve wide open and we're going to turn it off. So I'll show you how to do that. Now if you adjust anything in the ranges and you want to go back, we can hit the reset and it should reset that range back to the default settings. Now one thing you want to be careful with in ranges is if I come in here with an automation machine and I give my fan a new range, my pre-sieve a new range, my sieves a new range, my rotor speed and my rotor vanes a new range, automation may get confused. It may be enough parameters adjusted that it can't work the way that it should work. So I typically want to use this very minimally. Another example where I used it last fall was in corn, doing food grade corn on the rotor speed. And we were seeing that basically to keep that damage down, we were always running at 300 RPM. So we came in here, we dropped that down to about 260 RPM. So let that rotor speed drop down a little bit more in that food grade corn. So I mentioned briefly the lower sieve in high moisture corn. So what I typically do for that is I go into my toolbox, I come over to my cleaning tab, I find my lower sieve, I've got a remote lower sieve installed, I take my lower sieve armrest adjustment, I open that lower sieve to its maximum setting, and then I come in here and I set remote lower sieve to no. So what that does is it still allows that upper sieve its full range of movement and automation, but it locks the lower sieve at its widest position and it takes it out of the equation for automation. So that's going to make automation just work with the pre-sieve and the upper sieve and the fan for cleaning. It's no longer going to be able to use the lower sieve. So I've found that works pretty good, especially if you're doing high moisture corn, at minimizing those tailings and getting that crop on through the lower sieve and up to the grain tank. Now we can't adjust the lower sieve when it's set to no, so if we change crops, we change crop conditions, we want to bring that lower sieve back into the equation. We go back there, we turn it back on, and now we've got that lower sieve back in the system again. We can adjust it with the armrest switch again.